It was a grey morning. The kind of morning that feels heavier than winter itself. The sky hung low, thick with clouds, and the cold seemed to settle deep in the bones. Marcus stood outside the courthouse holding a folder in his hands. The papers inside would end his marriage. Years of shared meals, shared holidays, shared silence, all reduced to ink on white sheets. He had imagined this day many times. In his mind, it was supposed to feel clean. Final. Quiet. Two adults signing documents, shaking hands, and walking away with dignity. That's what he had told himself for months. That this was necessary. That sometimes love simply runs out. That grown people know when it's time to let go. But nothing about that morning felt clean. The hallway inside the courthouse smelled like old paper and something else, something heavier. Regret, maybe. Marcus kept his eyes on the folder. He didn't want to look up yet. He told himself to stay steady. Sign the papers. Close the chapter. Go home. Then he looked up. And his breath stopped. Standing across the hallway was Alina. The woman he once loved enough to promise forever. Her face looked calmer than he remembered. Stronger. There was no anger in her expression. No bitterness. Just a quiet steadiness. But it wasn't her face that shook him. It was her body. Beneath her coat, her stomach was rounded and full. She was pregnant. 7 months pregnant. Marcus felt like the ground shifted beneath him. For a moment, everything went silent. The hallway, the people walking past, even his own thoughts, gone. Time slowed down as if the world wanted him to feel every second of it. He had not known. Not a word. Not a hint. The child growing inside her had lived and breathed for months without him even knowing it existed. A sharp pain hit his chest. Not physical, something deeper. A mix of shock, confusion, and something that felt very much like regret. He had replayed this day in his head over and over. But in none of those versions was Alina standing there carrying a child. Their divorce was supposed to be simple. Instead, it felt like his whole life had just cracked open. Their marriage hadn't ended with shouting or slammed doors. It hadn't ended with betrayal. It had ended slowly. Quietly. Like a candle burning down to nothing. Marcus worked long hours. He believed that being a good husband meant providing. Paying the bills. Keeping the house stable. Making sure there was security. Alina had wanted something different. She wanted conversation. She wanted evenings together. She wanted to feel seen. And somewhere between long workdays and postponed talks, they stopped reaching for each other. Small misunderstandings piled up. Pride kept them silent. Apologies came too late, or not at all. When they finally agreed to separate, it was almost polite. Two tired people admitting they didn't know how to fix what was broken. Marcus told himself walking away was strong. That it showed maturity. That sometimes love just doesn't survive. But standing there in that hallway, looking at Alina, and at the life she carried, he realized something painful. Life had moved forward without him. He watched the way she rested her hands gently over her stomach. Protective. Careful. There was a softness in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. But there was also strength. She looked different. Not weaker. Stronger. And that frightened him more than anything. How many nights had she faced fear alone? How many doctor visits? How many quiet tears? He wasn't there for any of it. He had been busy telling himself he had made the right decision. Now he wasn't so sure. When their eyes met, there was no shouting. No drama. Just a long, heavy silence filled with everything they had never said. Marcus felt smaller in that moment than he had ever felt in his life. For the first time, he asked himself a question he had avoided for months. Had he walked away because it was right? Or because it was easier? There is a difference. Sometimes we tell ourselves we are choosing peace, when really we are avoiding the hard work of staying. Marcus had believed that providing money was enough. That stability was love. But love, he now understood, is more than a paycheck. It is presence. It is listening. It is sitting in uncomfortable conversations instead of escaping them. As they sat in the courtroom waiting for their case to be called, Marcus couldn't stop glancing at Alina. He noticed details he had once ignored. The way she shifted carefully in her seat. The way she breathed slowly, as if steadying herself. The quiet exhaustion in her face, not bitterness, not anger, just the weight of carrying something precious alone. That humbled him. Truly humbled him. He had thought their story was over. But clearly, something had continued long after he stepped away. The judge spoke. Lawyers shuffled papers. Words were said. Marcus heard almost none of it. All he could think was this? There is a life coming into this world. And I almost missed it. For a man in his later years, pride can become a dangerous companion. You convince yourself you were right. That you did your best. That what happened was simply fate. But as Marcus sat there, he felt something break inside him. Not his heart. His pride. And sometimes, that is the beginning of real change. When the hearing ended, they stood again in the hallway. The same grey light filtered through the windows. Alina looked at him, not with hatred, not with blame, but with calm. And that calm felt heavier than anger ever could. Marcus wanted to say 1,000 things. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Let me help. But the word stuck in his throat. Because apologies are easy. Accountability is harder. As Alina slowly walked toward the exit, Marcus realized that this moment was not punishment. It was a wake-up call. And sometimes, at this stage of life, wake-up calls are rare gifts. He didn't know yet what he would do. He didn't know if there was still a chance to rebuild anything. But he knew one thing for certain. He could no longer hide behind the idea that walking away was strength. Standing there in that courthouse hallway, watching the woman he once loved carry a child he hadn't known about, Marcus understood something that many people only learn too late. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It keeps moving. And sometimes, if we are brave enough to look honestly at ourselves, it offers us one more chance, not to go back, but to grow. That grey morning did not end his story. It began something far more important. And Marcus was about to find out what kind of man he truly was. After the courthouse that day, Marcus did not go straight home. He sat in his car for nearly an hour. The engine was off. The world outside moved on like nothing had happened. People crossed the street. Cars passed. A woman walked her dog. Life continued the way it always does. But inside that car, Marcus felt like everything had changed. He kept seeing Alina standing in that hallway. 7 months pregnant. Calm. Strong. Alone. The word alone hit him the hardest. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. For months, he had told himself the divorce was mutual. That they both agreed it wasn't working. That nobody was to blame. But now, new questions started rising in his mind. When did she find out she was pregnant? Did she sit on the edge of the bed holding that test by herself? Did she cry? Did she feel afraid? And why hadn't she told him? That question burned. Why didn't she tell me? At first, his pride tried to answer. Maybe she didn't want me involved. Maybe she thought I wouldn't care. But deep down, another voice spoke, quieter, but more honest. Maybe she didn't tell you because you weren't there anymore. Marcus had left emotionally long before the legal separation. He had buried himself in work, in routine, in distractions. He told himself he was tired. That life was stressful. That every marriage goes through dry seasons. But he never truly asked Alina how she was feeling. He never slowed down enough to notice how lonely she had become. Providing money had felt like enough. Now he saw how wrong that was. There's a kind of regret that creeps in slowly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It just sits with you. Quiet. Heavy. That's what Marcus felt sitting in that car. Not dramatic heartbreak. Not rage. Just a deep awareness that he had missed something important. For many men, especially later in life, admitting mistakes feels like weakness. You grow up believing you must be steady, strong, unshaken. But strength without humility turns into distance. And distance can quietly destroy what love once built. Marcus drove home that afternoon, but the house didn't feel the same. It had been quiet since Alina moved out. He had gotten used to that quiet. Told himself he liked it. No arguments. No tension. No emotional conversations. Just peace. But now that quiet felt different. It felt empty. He walked through the living room slowly. His eyes landed on small things he had stopped noticing: a photo frame still on the shelf, a lamp Alina had picked out, a blanket folded neatly on the couch the way she used to do it. He realized something painful. He had been living in the past without even knowing it. He sat down at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. Should I call her? Should I ask? Should I say something? But what do you say to a woman who carried your child for 7 months without you knowing? Why didn't you tell me? That question suddenly felt selfish. Maybe the better question was, why didn't I make myself someone she could lean on? That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept thinking about responsibility. Not just legal responsibility. Moral responsibility. Emotional responsibility. A child was coming into this world soon. His child. Whether the marriage survived or not, that fact did not change. And fatherhood is not something you clock in and out of. It is permanent. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He looked honestly at himself. Not the version he showed co-workers. Not the version he defended during arguments. The real version. The one who avoided hard talks. The one who chose silence instead of vulnerability. The one who thought being right was more important than being connected. He didn't like everything he saw. But for the first time, he didn't look away. A few days passed before he gathered the courage to reach out. His message was simple. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I would like to be involved. Not to change the past. Just to do what's right. He stared at the phone after sending it, heart pounding like a young man waiting for an answer. Hours passed. Then finally, her reply came. We can talk. No anger. No drama. Just calm. That calm humbled him again. When they met at a small cafe later that week, Marcus noticed how different Alina seemed. There was a steadiness in her voice. A quiet confidence. She wasn't leaning on him anymore. She had learned to stand on her own. That realization hurt, but it also made him respect her more than ever. She told him about the first doctor visit. About hearing the heartbeat. About the fear she felt in the beginning. Not once did she accuse him. Not once did she attack. She simply told the truth. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel trapped, she said gently. You had already chosen to leave. I didn't want a baby to become the reason you stayed. Those words hit Marcus harder than any accusation could have. She had protected his freedom even at the cost of carrying everything alone. He felt shame rise in his chest. Not the toxic kind. The kind that wakes you up. I would never see our child as a trap, he said quietly. I know that now, she replied. That nows meant something. It meant she had been watching him. Watching whether he would disappear completely. Watching whether he would take responsibility without being forced. Trust does not rebuild with promises. It rebuilds with consistency. Marcus understood that. So he didn't make big speeches. He didn't beg. He didn't try to undo the divorce in one conversation. Instead, he asked practical questions. What appointments are coming up? What do you need? How can I support you? And when she answered, he listened. Really listened. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to defend himself. He wasn't trying to win. He was simply trying to show up. That week, something shifted inside him. He stopped seeing himself as the victim of a failed marriage. He started seeing himself as a man who still had a chance to grow. Growth at this age doesn't come from proving something. It comes from accepting responsibility without excuses. Marcus began attending doctor visits. Sitting quietly in waiting rooms. Holding his breath during ultrasounds. Hearing the steady rhythm of a tiny heartbeat changed him in ways he didn't expect. It made everything feel real. Not abstract. Not theoretical. Real. And with that reality came fear. But also purpose. For the first time since the separation, Marcus felt awake. The divorce papers were still there. The past was still painful. Nothing was magically fixed. But something important had started. He was no longer running. And sometimes, especially later in life, that is the most powerful step a person can take. The grey morning at the courthouse had shaken him. But this, sitting beside Alina in a quiet doctor's office, hearing their child's heartbeat, this began to reshape him. Regret had opened his eyes. Responsibility was beginning to open his heart. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus understood something simple but life-changing. It is never too late to become better than you were yesterday. Change did not happen overnight. Marcus wished it could have. He wished there were a single conversation that could erase years of distance. But life doesn't work that way, especially not at their age. When you're young, you can patch things up quickly and move forward without looking too closely at the damage. But after decades of living, loving, and losing, you know better. Trust takes time. And trust, once shaken, moves carefully. Marcus began showing up in small, steady ways. Not dramatic. Not flashy. Just consistent. He drove Alina to appointments when she allowed it. He picked up groceries. He asked how she was sleeping. He didn't push conversations about the marriage. He didn't bring up the past unless she did. For the first time, he understood that listening was more powerful than explaining. There were awkward moments. Sitting beside each other in waiting rooms without knowing what to say. Walking to the car in silence. Standing too close, yet feeling the years of distance between them. But Marcus stayed. That was new for him. In the past, when conversations became uncomfortable, he would shut down. When emotions ran high, he would withdraw. He had convinced himself that silence prevented arguments. In truth, silence had built walls. Now, when something felt uncomfortable, he forced himself to remain present. He breathed through the tension. He allowed pauses without escaping them. One afternoon, after a routine checkup, they sat in Alina's living room. The baby's room was half prepared. A small crib stood against the wall. Soft blankets folded neatly nearby. Marcus looked around quietly. "I didn't picture this," he admitted. "Neither did I," Alina replied. There was no blame in her voice. Just honesty. He glanced at the crib again. "Were you scared?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to answer, but because she was choosing her words carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "At first, I was terrified." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you call me?" She looked at him gently. "Marcus, you had already left in your heart." "I didn't want to beg someone to stay." That sentence stayed with him long after he drove home that night. You had already left in your heart. How many relationships end long before the paperwork begins? How many times do we drift emotionally while still sharing the same house? Marcus realized that physical presence means very little if emotional presence is missing. He had been there in body, but not in spirit. Now he was trying to reverse that. But he understood something important: he could not demand forgiveness. He could not expect gratitude for doing what he should have done all along. He simply had to continue. Weeks passed. Alina's belly grew heavier. Her movement slower. There were nights she called him because she felt discomfort or anxiety. And he came. Not complaining. Not irritated. Just steady. That steadiness began to soften something in her. Not dramatically. Quietly. Trust does not return with fireworks. It returns like sunrise, slowly, almost unnoticed, until suddenly the light is there. One evening, as they assembled a small dresser for the baby's clothes, Marcus made a mistake with the screws. In the past, he would have snapped in frustration. Blamed the instructions. Thrown the manual aside. Instead, he laughed. A real, humble laugh. "Looks like I still don't read directions well," he said. Alina smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in a long time. "That hasn't changed," she replied softly. There was warmth in that moment. Small. But real. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in his house thinking about the man he had been. He had always seen himself as responsible. Dependable. A provider? But he now understood something deeper. Responsibility is not just about money. It is about emotional safety. It is about being someone your partner can turn to when life feels overwhelming. Alina had faced her pregnancy alone at first because she didn't feel emotionally safe reaching out to him. That truth hurt. But pain, when accepted honestly, can transform a person. Marcus began seeing a counselor. Not because Alina demanded it. Because he needed it. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Talking about feelings at his age seemed unnecessary. He had lived long enough to believe he knew himself. But he quickly realized there were parts of him he had never examined. His fear of failure. His discomfort with vulnerability. His habit of equating silence with strength. The counselor asked him a simple question one day. "When things get hard, do you lean in or pull away?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I pull away." "And what does that protect you from?" He thought about it carefully. Feeling inadequate. That was it. Whenever Alina expressed disappointment or need, he felt like he was failing. Instead of staying in the discomfort and trying to understand her, he withdrew to protect his pride. Pride had cost him connection. Now he was learning something many people only learn very late in life. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is courage. Meanwhile, Alina was watching him quietly. Not judging. Just observing. She noticed he no longer rushed conversations. He asked questions and waited for answers. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself when she shared old hurts. One evening, she spoke about a night months ago when she had tried to tell him how lonely she felt. He had brushed it aside, saying he was tired from work. "I went to bed feeling invisible," she admitted. The old Marcus would have said, "I was exhausted. I worked all day." The new Marcus simply said, "I'm sorry I made you feel invisible." No excuses. No explanations. Just acknowledgement. Tears filled her eyes, not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears. Sometimes, being heard heals more than being fixed. As the due date approached, something began to shift between them. They weren't back together. They hadn't made promises. But there was a new respect growing. Marcus understood that this was not about saving a marriage anymore. It was about becoming the kind of man his child could look up to. And maybe, just maybe, the kind of man Alina could trust again. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange at sunset, Alina placed her hand gently on her belly. "The baby kicked," she said. Marcus instinctively leaned closer. "Can I?" She nodded. He placed his hand there carefully. And then he felt it. A small, strong movement beneath his palm. It took his breath away. That tiny kick felt like a message. Life. Hope. Responsibility. In that moment, Marcus understood something powerful. This was not about correcting the past. It was about honoring the future. And honoring the future required him to stay, and not just physically, but emotionally. The sun dipped below the horizon. They sat quietly. Not as strangers. Not yet fully reunited. But as two people who had learned through pain what truly matters. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus did not feel like running. He felt ready to stay. As the due date grew closer, time seemed to move in two different ways. Some days passed slowly. Heavy. Careful. Measured by doctor visits and quiet evenings. Other days rushed by, as if life itself was hurrying toward something neither of them could stop. Marcus felt it in his chest, that quiet awareness that a turning point was coming. He no longer saw the baby as an abstract idea. This was real. A crib waiting. Tiny clothes folded. A hospital bag by the door. One evening, Alina called him later than usual. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. "I think it's starting," she said softly. Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't panic. He grabbed his keys and drove. On the way there, he noticed something about himself. He wasn't afraid of responsibility anymore. He was afraid of missing it. When he arrived, Alina was sitting on the edge of her couch, breathing slowly, one hand resting on her belly. "I didn't want to call too soon," she said. "But the contractions are closer now." He knelt beside her. "I'm here," he said. And this time, those words meant something. The drive to the hospital felt different from any drive he had ever taken. The world outside looked the same, traffic lights, street signs, late-night diners glowing under neon lights, but inside the car, everything felt sacred. This wasn't about fixing the past. This was about showing up in the present. At the hospital, time blurred. Nurses moved calmly. Machines beeped softly. Instructions were given. Paperwork signed. Marcus stayed by her side. He held her hand when the contractions grew stronger. He wiped her forehead. He spoke softly when the pain overwhelmed her. There were moments when Alina closed her eyes tightly, breathing through discomfort, and Marcus felt something break open inside him. Not guilt. Not shame. Something deeper. Reverence. He understood then how strong she truly was. For months, she had carried this life alone in silence. And now she was bringing it into the world with courage he had never fully recognized. Hours passed. Long. Exhausting. Real. There were no dramatic speeches between them. No sudden declarations about love. Just presence. Steady. Intentional. And in those quiet hours, something healed, not with words, but with action. At one point, Alina looked at him through tired eyes. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. 3 simple words. But to Marcus, they felt like grace. Because being allowed to stand there, after everything, was not something he deserved automatically. It was something he had earned back slowly. Then, just before dawn, the moment arrived. A cry filled the room. Strong. Clear. Alive. Marcus felt his knees weaken. The nurse lifted the baby gently. "It's a boy," she said. Or maybe she said girl, it almost didn't matter in that first second. What mattered was the sound. The breath. The undeniable reality of life entering the world. Tears filled Marcus's eyes. Not the kind you try to hide. The kind you allow. Because some moments are too big for pride. They placed the baby in Alina's arms first. She looked down with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. Then she looked at Marcus. "Come closer," she said. He stepped forward carefully. The nurse guided his hands. And for the first time, Marcus held his child. The weight was small. But the meaning was enormous. He looked down at that tiny face, wrinkled, fragile, perfect, and felt something shift permanently inside him. All the arguments. All the pride. All the distance. They seemed small now. Not unimportant. But small compared to this. This was legacy. This was responsibility. This was love in its purest form. Marcus realized something powerful in that hospital room. Second chances do not erase the past. They give you the opportunity to live differently moving forward. As the morning light began to filter through the hospital window, Marcus sat quietly in a chair, watching Alina rest with the baby on her chest. The room was peaceful. Soft. Sacred. He thought about that grey courthouse morning. How broken he had felt. How ashamed. How unsure. If someone had told him that day that he would be sitting here now, humbled, grateful, present, he might not have believed it. But life has a way of teaching lessons in unexpected ways. He didn't know yet what would happen with the marriage. They hadn't talked about reconciliation. They hadn't made promises. But something deeper had formed. Respect. Trust, slowly returning. Shared responsibility. Later that afternoon, when family members began calling and sending messages, Marcus stepped outside for a moment. He needed air. He leaned against the hospital wall and allowed himself to think clearly. This child deserved a father who stayed. Not just in moments of crisis. Not just in moments of celebration. But in the ordinary days. The sleepless nights. The frustrating afternoons. The school plays. The doctor visits. The simple breakfasts at the kitchen table. Marcus made a quiet promise right there in that hallway. Not a loud promise spoken for applause. A private vow. I will not run when things get hard. Because that had been his pattern. When pressure rose, he escaped. When emotions grew intense, he withdrew. No more. Fatherhood demanded something different. It demanded courage that looked like consistency. When he returned to the room, Alina was awake. She looked at him differently now. Not as the man who left. Not fully as the man she once loved. But as the father of her child. And that title carried weight. You did well, she said softly. He shook his head. You did, he replied. They shared a quiet smile. There were still unanswered questions. Still history to sort through. Still wounds that required careful tending. But something beautiful had happened. Not just the birth of a child. The birth of maturity. Of humility. Of a new understanding. As Marcus stood there looking at his child sleeping peacefully, he realized something that many people only understand after loss. Love is not proven by words. It is proven by who you choose to be when life tests you. The grey morning at the courthouse had been a wake-up call. This morning, bright, warm, full of new life, felt like redemption. And redemption does not mean perfection. It means growth. Marcus didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid of it. Because he wasn't running anymore. He was staying. And staying, he had learned, is the foundation of everything that truly matters. The first night home with the baby was quiet, but not peaceful. There were soft cries every few hours. Diapers to change. Bottles to warm. Blankets to adjust. Sleep came in short pieces, not long stretches. Marcus had forgotten how exhausting a newborn could be. But this time, he didn't complain. When the baby cried at 2:17 in the morning, he got up before Alina could even swing her legs off the bed. I've got it, he whispered. He lifted his child carefully, holding that small body against his chest. The baby's warmth spread through him like something sacred. He walked slowly across the living room, humming a tune he barely remembered from his own childhood. The house that once felt empty now felt alive. Messy. Loud. Real. Alina watched him from the doorway. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Trust isn't built in speeches. It's built in moments like that. 2:17 a.m., tired eyes, steady hands. The days that followed were simple. Not dramatic. Not filled with big turning points. Just ordinary life. Laundry piling up. Doctor appointments. Short naps on the couch. Marcus showed up every single day. He learned how to change diapers without fumbling. He memorized feeding times. He held the baby through long stretches of crying when nothing seemed to help. And something inside him continued to grow. Not pride. Purpose. He no longer felt like a man trying to fix a mistake. He felt like a father building a future. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the birth, Alina sat across from him at the kitchen table. The baby was asleep in a small bassinet nearby. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. "We need to talk," she said gently. Marcus felt that old tension rise in his chest, the feeling he used to run from. But he stayed seated. "I know," he said calmly. They didn't talk about the past in angry detail. They didn't reopen every old argument. Instead, they talked about the future. About co-parenting. About stability. About what kind of home they wanted their child to grow up in. Alina looked at him carefully. "You've changed," she said. Marcus didn't rush to answer. "I'm trying to," he replied. There was no ego in his voice. No need for applause. Just honesty. "I don't need perfection," Alina continued. "I just need consistency." That word stayed with him. Consistency. Not grand gestures. Not dramatic promises. Consistency. It was the very thing he had lacked before. He nodded slowly. "You have it," he said. "From now on." There was still hesitation in her eyes. That was natural. Wounds don't disappear because someone tries harder for a few weeks. But she also saw something real. He wasn't trying to win her back with words. He was simply becoming different. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The routine settled into something steady. Morning feedings. Afternoon walks with the stroller. Evenings where Marcus sat quietly holding his child while Alina showered or rested. And in those quiet evenings, he often thought about the man he used to be. The man who believed providing money was enough. The man who confused silence with strength. The man who walked away because staying felt uncomfortable. He didn't hate that version of himself. He understood him. But he was no longer him. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light filled the living room, Marcus sat on the floor with the baby lying on a soft blanket. Tiny fingers reached up, grabbing his thumb. That simple touch felt like a message. "You are needed. Not for your paycheck. Not for your pride. For your presence." Alina stood nearby, watching. After a long moment, she sat down beside him. Close. Not distant. Not guarded. Just close. They didn't talk about getting back together. They didn't rush into redefining their relationship. They allowed space for something new to grow. And sometimes, that's how healing really works. Slow. Quiet. Unforced. One night, after putting the baby to sleep, Alina turned to him in the kitchen. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted. "Not because you worked hard. But because I felt alone." Marcus nodded. "I know," he said softly. "And I don't want to feel alone again." "You won't," he replied. There was no dramatic music playing in the background. No perfect movie moment. Just two adults speaking truthfully. And that was enough. Forgiveness, Marcus learned, isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let it control what happens next. Alina had every reason to close her heart completely. Instead, she chose courage. And Marcus understood something very important. Second chances are not owed. They are earned. Months later, as the baby grew stronger and smiles became more frequent, Marcus realized that his greatest lesson had nothing to do with marriage or even fatherhood. It had to do with growth. At any age, even after mistakes, even after pride, even after loss, a person can change. But only if they are willing to look honestly at themselves. One evening, sitting together on the porch, the same place where he had first felt that tiny kick beneath his hand, Marcus looked at Alina. "I almost lost everything," he said quietly. She nodded. "But you didn't," she replied. He thought about that grey morning in the courthouse hallway. How broken he had felt. How shocked. How ashamed. At the time, he believed that moment was the end. Now he understood it was the beginning. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart to punish us. It falls apart to wake us up. Marcus had been asleep in his own pride. The shock of seeing Alina pregnant on the day of their divorce had shaken him awake. And in waking up, he found something better than comfort. He found responsibility. Humility. Love that is shown through action, not just words. Whether their marriage would fully return to what it once was didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was this. He stayed. He grew. He became a man his child could depend on. And sometimes, that is the greatest redemption of all. If there is one thing this story teaches, especially to those of us who have lived long enough to know regret, it is this. It is never too late to change. It is never too late to show up. It is never too late to choose courage over pride. The most painful endings can become the doorway to something stronger, if the heart is brave enough to accept the lesson. Marcus once believed love had worn out. Now he understood something much deeper. Love doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits for maturity. For humility. For someone willing to stay. And in that staying, life begins again.